A secure perimeter. You have to maintain secure custody and chain of custody on any items that are recovered here.
Debris collected from the Foster Ranch back in 1947 followed a much more shadowy chain of custody. Major Jesse Marcel delivered the bizarre material to his commanding officer, Colonel William Blanchard, who then ordered Marcel to hand deliver it to 8th Air Force Commander General Roger Ramey in Fort Worth, Texas. Robert J. Shirkey, Assistant Group Operations Officer for the 509th Bomb Group, received Blanchard's B-29 requisition.
On the day in question, Colonel Blanchard had come into operations office and asked, "Where's my airplane?" And I told him, and I said, "It's parked right out on the ramp." And it was a B-29. That he stepped back in the doorway and waved his hand and said, "Come on through." Major Marcel was one of the people coming through holding a box that had some aluminum-type looking pieces of metal. And in the corner of his box was one of the I-beams that everyone talks about.
In 1947, George Newling was a 17-year-old flight mechanic at the Roswell Army Air Base. Newling was one of the last soldiers at Roswell to get a look at the B-29's unusual cargo. After 55 years of silence, he's agreed to be interviewed for our program.
I got to the airplane, there was MPs standing around it with machine guns. That was very weird. They just checked my pass, and I went on in the aircraft. And that's when I spotted this object. It was a gray, but it was a weird gray. It was nothing I'd ever seen before, or ever have seen since. I was standing there with my mouth open, looking at it. Well, that's when they escorted me down to the provost marshal. He said, "Just forget what you seen and go on back to barracks and don't go back on the line."
Robert Slusher, an airman with the 509th, was a member of a second B-29 flight crew at the Roswell Air Base. After Marcel left for Fort Worth with the wreckage, Slusher and his crew departed with a payload that was even more mysterious.
It's a box. It was probably 11 foot long, probably 5 foot wide. We loaded it, and the 3 MPs come inside the airplane and got on top of that box. And we took off and flew it to Fort Worth. On the way back, Lieutenant Martucci says, "Boys, we've just made history." What he meant by it, I have no idea. And then when they got back, they just said, "This is a classified mission. Don't talk." So the next day, the rumor got out, said you flew the bodies back to Fort Worth.
Back at the debris field, Provost Marshal Major Edwin Easley's main concern was to find any remaining debris. Under orders from Colonel Blanchard, he supervised a thorough cleanup of the area.
My father was asked to bring a contingent of men out here and secure the site to keep people from coming to the site. And later on, it's my understanding that he and his men cleaned the site and took away whatever was here.
They basically grabbed anybody who was free to come out here to actually get down on their hands and knees to pick up the pieces of debris.
Blanchard's next step was perhaps even more puzzling. He contacted 25-year-old public relations officer Walter Hott.
I went up to headquarters, and he told me that we had in our possession pieces of a flying saucer. Told me what he wanted in a press release. This was information that was given to me by the base commander, and when he told me to do something, that was it. If the boss man said that we had a flying saucer in our possession, we had one, and that was it.
Hott hand-delivered the release to the local newspapers and radio stations, then went home for lunch. By the next morning, the story was worldwide news.
The phone was ringing off the hook all over Roswell. at the base, the sheriff's office, radio station, newspapers, etc. This is 2 weeks after the big noise began about flying saucers. Headlines all over the 44 states there were sightings.
Meanwhile, after arriving at Fort Worth, Texas with his mysterious cargo, Major Jesse Marcel debriefed General Roger Ramey, commander of the 8th Air Force, on the sequence of events thus far.
According to Marcel, General Ramey took him to the map room and said, point out where you found this stuff. And Marcel was a map maker by profession. We came back and they laid out this weather balloon while he wasn't there. He was taken completely by surprise. He didn't realize that they were going to pull this switch on him.
Ramey had gotten a call from a general at the Pentagon to get the press off their back. And Ramey had come up with the idea of substituting wreckage from a weather balloon. And so Ramey told the press that all this stuff was simply a weather balloon. And that was what most of the press published the next day.
They never saw the real material. The real material went on to Washington at that time. So Marcel is ordered to pose with the substituted radar reflector balloon. So the first press release that it was a flying saucer, and 6 hours later, we're sorry, ladies and gentlemen, it's just a weather balloon. The question is, which press release is the true story?
The next day you had stories like Ramey washes out Roswell saucer, or words to that effect.
By the time Marcel returned home to his family, Ramey had made his orders clear.
When he came back in, he was very serious about never describing this again. Treat this as a non-event, didn't happen. Don't talk about this with your friends. Just don't let them know anything at all unusual happened, which, of course, I obeyed. We didn't even discuss it amongst ourselves for quite a while.
Just a weather balloon. That was the U.S. Army's official explanation for what crashed outside of Roswell, New Mexico in 1947. In the months and years that followed, the military launched a PR offensive aimed at reassuring anxious Americans that the skies were safe from alien invaders.
It does not contain any pattern of purpose or of consistency that we can relate to any conceivable threat to the United States.
Public interest in the last few years has increased very greatly in the phenomenon which has been identified as flying saucers. These stories have led to much fiction and much fancy.
At the time, no one questioned the military story. With the Second World War only a couple of years behind them, patriotic Americans trusted their government. If Uncle Sam said there were no UFOs, there were no UFOs. If it was indeed the crash of an extraterrestrial spacecraft, why was the government going to such great lengths to cover it up?
Let us hypothesize that the year is 1947 and that your name is Harry Truman. And let us further hypothesize that your military somehow obtained crash wreckage of some kind of technology that wasn't your own and that wasn't Soviet. The question is, what would you do about it? Well, we know in 1947, for instance, that the U.S. had a monopoly of nuclear technology, of working atomic bombs, and we know that the entire world was hammering at the door of the United Nations to get the United States to make atomic technology public, that is, to put it under the control of the United Nations. The U.S. response to that was absolutely no way are we going to share nuclear technology with anyone. If they're not going to share nuclear technology in 1947, what on earth are they going to do about something as exotic as alien technology? Well, I think the answer would be clear. You would make it so secret, you would in a sense almost keep it secret from yourself.
Following General Roger Ramey's press conference on July 8, 1947, it appeared that the Roswell incident was successfully dead and buried.
After 1947, through about 1978, very little was done on the Roswell case. There were mentions here and there. There were references to it. Usually, if it was referenced, it was suggested it was a hoax or a misidentification.